Hello, hello, and welcome to Week Old Beans episode, I believe, 37. I am your host, Ardot, and I have with me here Fowler. Ardot has
The
been...
other host.
Yes, shut up. The other host, Fowler. Ardot has been... I don't know why I'm speaking in third person. Ardot has been a little bit under the weather, so you'll have to forgive me if I'm not as chipper and rowdy as I normally am. I had food poisoning, so my body is still trying to recover from the bout of projectile vomiting that I had for a good 12 hours. Fucking suck.
Ardot says it's food poisoning. I say COINTELPRO is trying to take me out, but they just mixed our addresses up, so they got Ardot instead.
Well, that's really saying something. If I didn't, I'm fucking still alive, bitch. What does that say about my resolve? COINTELPRO was trying to take me out. I survived, motherfucker. The FBI man in my computer. I'm looking right at him. Fuck him. Try again, bitch.
Knock on wood.
No, fucking knock on wood, bro. Don't hate me because I'm beautiful, bro. But yeah, so I'm gonna let Fowler really be the heavyweight of this discussion. Cause I'm fading in and out. So so Fowler, why don't you tell the people what we're talking about today?
Do you remember, did we talk about Rashida Tlaib and her stance on the podcast? I remember we talked about it. I just don't remember if we did it on the podcast. Do you remember?
I think we gave it a brief mention. I don't think that we but I don't think we really went in depth about it. I think we just mentioned that was a thing. And then we just moved on to whatever else we were talking about on that episode. But do you want to rehash for people what's going on?
Rashida Tlaib is a member of the squad. She's the only Palestinian American representative in the U.S. Congress, I think, ever. And,
yes, she's one of. I think she's only Palestinian American. Second, I think she's one of two. Ilhan Omar being the second. Two Muslim Americans ever to serve in Congress.
Ever elected, yeah.
Yeah.
She is the main one, but a lot of the Muslim American or Arab American leaders in Michigan have been advocating during the Democratic primary to not vote for Joe Biden and instead vote uncommitted. R.I.P. to Cenk Uygur's political campaign, by the way. And so, what was the number? It was over 100,000, right? Over 100,000 people wrote into the primary uncommitted.
Yeah.
Instead of Joe Biden.
Yes. For the Democratic primary, the results are still being counted. Actually, this is ongoing as we're speaking. They're 90. I actually checked right before we started the episode. It was 101,000, 97% counted, and then there's 32,000 votes that haven't been counted yet. So that number will change by a fraction, I'm sure, once they fully finish counting.
Yeah, but this is them obviously attempting to apply pressure on Joe Biden because they're not happy about. I mean, a lot of Muslim Americans are not happy about the way that the war has been going and what Netanyahu and the right-wing Israeli government has done. So this is an attempt to force Biden to basically be more diplomatic. And I think to some degree it's started to work. I mean, Joe Biden has called for a ceasefire for the first time since the beginning of the war, but question is really, is it going to be enough?
I don't think it will because Joe Biden has aggressively reaffirmed his support for Israel, even going so far as to say, as of the last 5 days, that he is a Zionist. And stupidly, I think this is the most egregious thing, stupidly stating that as long as Israel exists, or as long, what was it? Let me look at the exact quote. Let me see. Oh yeah, you need not be a Jew to be a Zionist. I'm a Zionist. Where there's no Israel, there's not a Jew in the world to be safe. Which to me is, a lot of people thankfully have been focusing on this commentary because that is an aggressively, in my opinion, an aggressively anti-Semitic thing to say. I mean, what does that say to American Jews? Basically saying, hey, American Jews, you're actually not safe in America as a Jewish person. The United States will make no effort to protect you from anti-Semitism. Therefore, the only true homeland that you have and true place to be safe that you had is Israel, a country that most American Jews were not born in, and you know, unless they took their I forgot what the word is, but you know where you travel to Israel in sort of a migration, birthright migration, have never actually been to before. That would be the equivalent of saying, "Hey, Black Americans, uh, you're never going to be safe in America. So we will guarantee the safety of Nigeria as a state, even though you've never been there and were not born there and have no connection there whatsoever. But you're Black, and so are Nigerians. So same people."
Well, I think a lot of Jewish people do think that. I don't know. I'd have to do polling on it, but I'm sure that like that is why a lot of Jews live in Israel, as they are afraid that even in a developed democracy, a Holocaust or a pogrom could happen again.
It's true. It's a good point. Um,
Yeah, I'm not necessarily against Israel existing. I just don't want them to be actively ethnically cleansing
yeah,
people. I feel like
and
that's
neither
a
am I. Let
reasonable.
me make this very clear. Um, Neither am I. Neither Fowler and I are anti-Israel existing. Obviously, I just find that sort of commentary, and I would have to look at polling, and I'll admit Fowler is far more knowledgeable about the Jewish community than I am because I live in a state where we do not have a high percentage of Jewish people living. I've just always found those sorts of statements very odd. As an ethnic minority myself, I've found it. I see it tantamount to telling like Black Americans like the stability of like Nigeria, like um, there's as long as Nigeria or Ghana or whichever African country a vast majority of slaves came from is stabilized, like you're not safe in America. Um, but we've made no real efforts to combat anti-Semitism in America either, so I understand if that's why that sentiment is probably strongly held if it is. Anti-Semitism is still a
Yeah,
massive
no, that
problem in
makes
the United
sense.
States.
Yeah, Joe Biden is a historically weak candidate, but for some reason, there's really not been a lot of groundswell about getting someone other than him. Like the polling indicates, most Americans think he's too old for the job. Most Americans are worried he's going to die in office.
I think it's the
Americans think that he's doing a good job. But in spite of that, like Dean Phillips, Marianne Williamson, like the uncommitted has gotten more votes than any of the third party players that are running in the Democratic primary, which I don't really understand why there's such a tapering off. Because I mean Nikki Haley, I don't think she's won any state. I think Trump has beaten her pretty solidly by 5 to 10 points every primary state so far. But at the very least, like the polling does seem to indicate the totals. Like the amount of votes that Nikki Haley gets in every state is approximately the amount of Republicans that are anti-Trump. It makes sense. But with the Democrat side, there has just not been.
yeah.
There's a lot
I'll
of
I'll
dissatisfaction,
I'll
but there's nobody channeling effectively.
I'll reiterate, or I guess to lend to your point about that. Like I said, I was checking the Michigan polling before we started the podcast, and the amount of uncommitted voters in the Democratic primary was less than, so if you were to put the Democratic primary and the Republican primary in Michigan together, Nikki Haley had more votes in the Republican primary than uncommitted. And in the Democratic primary, there were more, I think it was like 101,000 for uncommitted, like 35,000 for Marianne Williamson, and then for the Republican primary, it was like 252,000 for um, Nikki Haley, and then like 35,000 uncommitted. So Nikki Haley, at least within the Republican primary, like had more votes um, than uncommitted in the um, Democrat primary, and the uncommitted voters in Michigan, I'm sure a huge chunk of them were encouraged by Rashida Tlaib to vote uncommitted. And, she didn't just tell Muslim Americans, she told anybody, everybody, that had an issue with Biden's handling of the Israeli Palestine situation to vote uncommitted. And so, yeah, it's very weird. Like, I think it's the party apparatus. I don't necessarily think, or it's the sort of echo chambers um, that the varying sort of um, the echo chambers that exist within left wing spaces that maybe don't exist as fully amongst Republicans.
It's hard to tell. I mean, we're kind of sleepwalking toward destruction, though, because there are a lot of people who are dissatisfied with Joe Biden, but ultimately, like, if they don't coalesce behind a different non-Joe Biden candidate, it's all fucking pointless in the end, anyway.
Well, it looks to be too late now. It looks like it is. It looks like it's too late. Like um, we've reached the I think the mark for when a new candidate could have been chosen. I mean, the DNC could if they wanted to replace Biden, but um, I also think it's um, I think it's the party apparatus. I don't necessarily think it's the voters. I think it's the party apparatus. I think, Gavin Newsom was making some weird moves last year, like middle of last year, and that sort of tapered off. Um, and I part of me, I don't know what goes on behind the scenes, but part of me wonders if he was trying to make a bid, and the DNC basically, told him, the DNC basically told him no. Like, the DNC said, like, we're not going to attempt to back you. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that this is your last governorship, uh, or that you face significant difficulty in your home state. Um, because he would have been probably, um, naturally the most, um, he would have been naturally the best contender in my opinion, with the exception of a couple other people, um, in terms of qualifications, uh, but in youthfulness, obviously, I think what everybody wants is somebody younger, somebody who has Biden's, for the most part, same political opinions, but is younger, and Newsom definitely fits that role. Um, but I have a feeling
He's
that
a good candidate for the moderates, although I do think he has some corruption problems. I think I would go with a governor from a Rust Belt state like Gretchen Whitmer.
yeah, that you know what that's the
Um,
other person I was going to mention. Actually, I'm glad you brought her up because I knew there was a couple other people I couldn't think of them though, but Gretchen Whitmer was the other one. She
Warnock and
also made
Ossoff would also not be bad either, I don't think.
I don't think they have the experience yet to be a presidential candidate. Um, I think they're not well known enough, and I don't think they have the experience under their belt. Not saying they're not accomplished, but I think Whitmer and Newsom, Whitmer more so than Newsom. I think Newsom would have had issues because just the issues going on in California because it's an incredibly powerful state have captured national attention. Um, so I think he would have had issues because he would have had to have sort of uh, pleaded the case for why he should be president, um, against the backdrop of incredibly negative press within his own state, um, or against his own state. I think Whitmer would have been a strategically more intelligent decision because she's a woman, so she would have um, she would have checked off that box. And I think her actions during COVID were pretty highly regarded. I think I mean, she was the one that they tried to kidnap, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, that launching her to national attention. And then also, she's Michigan, right?
yeah.
I think her state has made a lot of positive gains recently. Like I've heard a lot of very good things coming out of Michigan, a lot of good things coming out of Michigan's economy. And they're sort of overall, they don't have as heavy of a stigma as California. So I think she would have been probably honestly, if I could choose today, I would pick her out over anybody. Over her, I would pick her over Kamala. I would pick her over Biden. I would pick her over anybody. Um, but I
Yeah,
think it's too late.
Whitmer's not really a capital P progressive, but I think she's a good middle level candidate in that she's done a couple progressive things and she's competent, but she's not necessarily like a Bernie-crat. So I think she would be like an effective person to unify. Also, Whitmer has a pretty good record of being able to pass policy she wants to pass. So I think, if you weren't going to take someone out of the progressive camp, I feel like Whitmer's one of the better ones.
Yeah.
I feel a little bit more mixed about Newsom. I think Newsom is a very charming, charismatic guy. I think he's a good public speaker, but he has been kind of in the eye of the storm with a lot
Yeah.
of the policies
Well,
he's pushing, and
Calif-
also, there's just he has some corruption problems.
yeah. Well, and California is like a very difficult state to run. It's like New York, I absolutely don't disagree, but I think it's incredibly difficult to run a state like California effectively. Same with New York. So it's I am much more pro Whitmer than I am pro Newsom in that regard. You still there, Fowler?
Yeah, still here.
Your Discord's being a bit wonky, bro.
Oh yeah, it's not letting me. Let me see if this works.
It's fine. We can still hear you. That's all we need.
Okay.
But yeah, it's yeah. I don't know.
Hopefully the 100,000 uncommitted is enough to shift Biden in a certain direction. I mean, we'll have to end up seeing, but I hope that's the case. I mean, even if you don't care about the Palestinians, I don't know, losing 100,000 votes in a state that's, part of your electoral map, I feel like is a pretty big deal.
Yeah, well, and I think it would be more tolerable if there wasn't a lot of polling to indicate that Biden has been really slipping amongst certain minority groups too. You know what I mean?
What do you mean?
I mean, there's polling to indicate that that more Hispanics and Black Americans are more willing to toss the coin with Trump or not vote for Biden. They're not as enthusiastic about Biden as they were in 2016. Which, I mean, again, if the polling were in the other direction and that were not the case, I can understand from a strategic standpoint being willing to allow Michigan to be more of a toss up. But like, you can't do that. Like, you can't, you know. You can't like increasingly think you can rely on, more and more, or think that your hold on a specific demographic is going to be forever. But I mean, you and I have both critiqued the Democratic Party for being strategic numbskulls over the past year, right?
Yeah.
So
I don't know. I think one of the risks of like controlling the party apparatus is you can, if you're at the top, you can sort of subvert democracy in small ways. It's a risky strategy because if you subvert democracy too openly, then people will just abandon the party and you'll lose legitimacy. But you do have some amount of wiggle room, and I think the problem with the Democratic moderates is that they kind of tried to shift the party politically or undemocratically during Bernie's races in order to help Clinton and also later Biden. And I think the problem is they've become much more reliant on kind of these undemocratic shifts in order to hold power. But if you keep doing it over and over again, you become dependent on it.
Fowler, I swear to God,
the more
mute your phone.
You're doing it, the
mute your phone, dude.
Yeah, sorry.
So you have to fucking put up with people.
I have Apple, so my stuff is all connected. So even if I mute my phone, it does. Yeah, but yeah. So I feel like the problem is that they have increasingly sort of um, I don't know. They've become too dependent on sort of using regulations within the party to push their way, and it's biting them in the ass because they have alienated and angered huge amounts of the Democratic Party who understandably are very fucking angry that they're not really using democratic means to allow them to pick their leadership, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a good example of this is obviously canceling the primaries in certain states. Like Fowler just said when Bernie was running. I mean, we know for a fact that I mean it's pretty well known that there was deliberate subversion of media subversion of Bernie Sanders during the 2016 election, and I think the 2020 election too. Um, I wouldn't go as far as to say that they stole the election. It's not like a Trumpian situation, but like we do know for a fact um, that there was some deliberate and pointed sabotage, I would say, by the DNC, and so it's like you've poked the bear too much in a way. Um, and they're I think they're starting to learn that even Democrats are not really willing to put up with that in a way. Along with I think one of the things that the Democratic Party really missed is like the influence of social media that um, the influence that social media has on people and the way that information spreads in the modern age. And I think that is tantamount, or at the very least a good example of you know like a vast majority of the Democratic Party. I mean, I think the Republicans are only worse by like a couple years, but like the Democratic Party is still a majority, like over the age of 60. They're not as spry and young as you know um, as they want you to believe. I mean, they're kind of equal. At least the people that hold power within the party are equally as old and fucking decrepit as fucking the Republican Party. I mean, Jesus Christ, look at what's her name, Senator Feinstein. She fucking refused to step down and died in office. Um, she's like 95.
It's hard not walking away from that kind of power. Once you have it, I think you'll do anything to keep it.
Yeah, but what power do you have
I
at
mean,
like
you could say
90
the same
years
thing
old?
about Joe Biden. I
Oh,
mean, like
absolutely. I
if
have a
he just stepped down now, he would have a reputation as like one of the best economies, with the largest infrastructure bill in American history, good on the environment, good on labor, and then like foreign policy changes, backing Taiwan, backing Ukraine, pulling out of Afghanistan. Like he would be an extremely important historical figure anyway. He
yeah.
doesn't need to, you know, lose the election to a fucking fascist in order to be remembered in history.
Yeah, it's to your point about stepping away from power. I mean, my question is like what when you're 90 something years old, what can you really do anyway? Like what? Like, Dianne Feinstein was on fucking conservatorship or whatever. Like she couldn't legally make decisions for herself, but she for some reason was allowed to legally make decisions in the halls of Congress, which is fucking crazy. Um, so yeah, like to your point, it's I think that does play a role too in it, and that's not to impugn people, or be ageist or whatever. But I mean, Jesus Christ, like we're not talking about like working at 7-Eleven. We're talking about the most powerful position in the world. I mean, literally being president of the United States or serving in the halls of Congress is one of the most important duties you can perform as an individual in I would say the world, because we're the most powerful country in the world. And I don't think it's ageist to suggest that, like, at the very least, the party should be cognizant of the fact that, like, having your entire upper staff slash leadership be run by people who are geriatric is probably not the smartest decision.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
what
the
do I
thing
know?
is, ironically enough, the Democratic Party is not the more Democratic Party between the two. like the Republican Party is historically the one that's way more susceptible to voting influences. But we see with Trump the downside of that. Like I think a lot of the Democratic Party is afraid of being more democratic because
Well, they're worried that
I
they'll elect
mean
somebody like Bernie Sanders.
The Trump base has ruined the fucking Republican Party. Like
Oh yeah,
they're
absolutely.
hemorrhaging money, they're getting sued all over the place. They've lost the House, or they lost the House, and then they barely gained it back, and then they lost the Senate, and then they lost the presidency. Like the risk of having the risk of having your voters be way more in control of your party is like it's much more easy for the party to be hijacked by lunatics and for you to be placed in the position that the Republicans are of Trump, which is like a huge percentage of their voters don't believe in democracy and are fucking retarded. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I think, I don't know if you heard me, but when you said that, I made the comment that, they were worried. We saw this with Bernie. Literally, like exactly what you described happened with Bernie Sanders, where, a big chunk of the Democratic Party was leaning too far to the left, and they nipped that shit in the bud before it could happen. Um, and I'm sure that's what they're scared of. They're scared that they'll lose to a younger, more ideologically in tune with the will of the people candidate. And that means that the Nancy Pelosi's and the Dianne Feinsteins will be out of power, and that for them is what it's all about. I don't really think it's about pushing a certain ideology that's going to benefit people. I think it's about maintaining their power base, and I think unfortunately, as much good that he's done for the economy, I think it's the same for the likes of Joe Biden and maybe his generation. They're not really concerned about what is best for the 2024 American. You know, they're concerned with how do I maintain how do I ha, the power is not bad. I mean, Fowler and I have talked in length about power and about how wanting power is important. If you're going to get anything done within a political system, you have to be able to understand how power functions, and you have to be able to at least have the desire for power in some way. But when the desire for power, when it supersedes the ideological desire that you have, like that's when you have an issue.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And I think balancing those two can be difficult, because we in America, we reward power. I mean, we are very rewarding of individuals who we perceive to be powerful and to be able to accomplish things through wielding power.
That's true. Do you have anything else you want to say, or do you want to move to the next topic? I'm trying to remember what the second topic was.
I think we can move to the second topic. I think we were going to talk about Mitch McConnell. Speaking of power, I think this is a good segue, talking about geriatrics and power.
Mitch McConnell he was the Senate Minority Leader, but he is stepping down basically. I think he's still gonna keep his seat in the Senate, but he is no longer going to be in charge. And this is this is a pretty big deal because Mitch McConnell across our dot and our lifetime and my lifetimes like has been one of the most consequential Republicans on the national scene. I mean, he's been in power for decades across decades. But I think the interesting thing about Mitch McConnell is, Mitch McConnell began his career as a political moderate and a pragmatist. But, the way Mitch McConnell has survived for so long is by basically having no principles. And he's just continuously, gone and moved farther and farther to the right, and he's allowed like the Tea Party and then Trump to basically just run everything. And despite the fact he doesn't really believe in any of that stuff that they're doing, in order to hold power and hold re-election, he's just continuously ceded to them and refused to fight them directly. And even in cases where Mitch McConnell really, even if he doesn't really care about the country, which I don't think he does, it would have benefited him. Like it was Mitch McConnell who was a big factor in like after Trump did Jan 6, where literally all the senators and congressmen could have been murdered by an angry crowd. I mean, Mitch McConnell was the one to basically not do anything and allow Trump to get away with it without any real ramifications. And I don't know, it's such a strange legacy to leave behind of like you were in power, but the way that you were able to maintain your power is by just never doing anything useful with that power,
Yeah.
which in my mind makes it pointless.
Yeah, exactly. Fowler and I had a discussion about this last night where we talked about, like being remembered in history and how, I think thinking about the people in history that we remember as great individuals, at the very least, people who we remember. I mean, greatness is obviously subjective. I think that George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were great men, but obviously in 2020 we had a national discussion about the merit of their contributions to American society because they were slave owners and they were racist and they believed things that are not considered politically correct in 2024. And to most Americans, even Americans who are minorities, I mean, I would hope that we would have an appreciation for the things that they did for America and the way that they contributed to the founding of America. But one man's hero is another man's villain. Um, throughout, because history is complex and complicated, and human beings are messy, and we're shitty and evil to each other and to ourselves, and um, so greatness is subjective, right? And but the thing is, like, you can't be somebody by doing nothing. And, I don't know if, I mean, I'm saying this because he's stepping down. If I, God forbid I ever enter the halls of politics. But even then, I don't know if I would be able to stomach stating that I have any sort of respect for Mitch McConnell and the things he's done. He is a truly contemptible human being, in my opinion. The lack of ideology, um, the lack of principle is truly detestable to me. And I think it goes beyond just being an opportunist. I think he is in a way he has sort of been he has contributed to the destruction of the GOP. He has contributed to the destruction of potentially the United States if we do end up losing our democracy under Trump. And he is not going to be remembered. Like, I think that's the thing. He's not going to be remembered because he never took a stand for anything in his entire life. I mean, I remember when Obama was elected back in 2008, and he basically stated that his existence was going to be to make sure that Obama passed nothing. And Obama did pass some things, but not everything. But, um, like Fowler just said, like you don't make history by doing nothing. And I think Mitch McConnell is a perfect example of a politician who has dominated both, because Fowler and I are, both me and Fowler are not old. I mean, we're young people. He's been in power our entire lives, and he's really just only been the iron wall to American progress and American betterment, um because of his lack of principle and ideology, and his tenacity to just being the worst, to being the worst representation of human greed and avarice.
McConnell has done a couple things to help his donors and to help the Republicans in the long term, but this is very much background stuff. I mean, McConnell, he blocked Merrick Garland from getting on the Supreme Court, and what I would argue was like a completely unacceptable breach of the way democracy is supposed to work. McConnell appointed a lot of right wing judges, and McConnell pushed a lot of tax cuts for the wealthy. But like, what are those accomplishments really? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, there are accomplishments to Republicans, but the Republican ideology is not. Um, I mean, we know this, right? Like, the conservative ideology as it exists today is not the majority. They are resorting to fascism because they know that, because they know they've lost several battles. They've lost the abortion battle. They've lost the contraceptive battle. I mean, um, I don't know if you this was on TYT. I saw this the other day, Fowler, but was it Kellyanne Conway? Her little think tank did polling. And I don't know if you know this, but in a lot of particularly southern states, and behind the scenes, because I don't think the Republican Party is aware that, like, I think they're aware that coming out with this would be disastrous, but a large majority of Republicans are in favor of banning contraceptives, like conservative leaders, not necessarily their constituents. And Kellyanne Conway did a poll, and she had to go back to prominent conservative leadership and say to them, "Hey, like, you need to shut the fuck up about banning contraceptives because um, actually, like 97% of Republican constituents use contraceptives because, yeah, of course, it's 2024. Like, what the fuck did you think? Like, yeah, duh. Um, so they're aware that they're like a lot of their positions um, are no longer popular and no longer politically viable. And so you either adapt or you die, and they've chosen to die. Uh, and they've chosen to die and take democracy along with it.
Yeah, I don't really know what you do if you're because the problem the Republicans have fundamentally is that they're afraid of their base. They have made their base so fearful and so hateful and so conspiracy laden and deluded that like they don't really live in reality anymore. And so a lot of them, like there's so much reporting that indicates like behind the scenes Republican leadership is terrified of their base. They're terrified of being Jan 6th. They're terrified of losing of the election. They're terrified of, being killed. Like they just but this is very much a product of their own creation. I mean, they are the ones who have used racism and hatred and fear for decades and decades now through the Southern strategy to sort of win elections. And of course, if you place yourself in that kind of position, you're going to um there's going to be an end result of you pushing that kind of propaganda for that long.
Yeah, it's yeah, no, exactly. It's they've created the monster that they have to lay in bed with, unfortunately. And I mean, um I would hate to be a Republican. I would hate to be a fucking Democrat right now, but I'd fucking hate to be a Republican. I'd hate to be a Republican even more. Like a moderate Republican. Um, you know what I mean? It's yeah, it's fucking terrifying. But yeah, I think Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell is not stepping down now. He is. I think these. I read that the Senate is going to vote on a new leader now, and then that new leader will take his place in November. He's not stepping down from his position as a senator. He is still going to be a senator, and I'm sure run for reelection. But he will no longer be serving as the leader of the Republican Party in the Senate. Um, you know. So he's not going anywhere. He made that abundantly clear in his very long, drawn out, difficult to listen to, announcement that he made on the floor of the Senate. I think it was yesterday. But but yeah, that's. I mean, that's it's the end of an era. I mean, it's going to be interesting. I mean, I read that his replacement might be somebody less radical than him. There's a couple people that I think that are vying for the position, but it seems like the person who is most likely to take his place is thankfully not a Trumper and not a radical Republican. He's actually quite moderate and actually somewhat to the left of the Republican Party in a weird way. He voted
Who is
for
that? Do you remember the name?
I don't. I would have to. We can maybe do a deep dive next pod. I mean, I think we should do. I should think we should wait to really talk about it until they announce who it is, and we could maybe spend a couple minutes on the podcast doing like little quick profiles of the candidates when they do announce them. But I think I read that he was what made him say now was that he was pro like union back in like the 90s or something. But who knows? I mean, again, the issue with I think Mitch McConnell set a precedent for this, but you don't really have to be principled to be, considered a leader of the Republican Party. You don't really have to have a strong ideological bent or be somebody who has strong ideas about how the country should run. You just have to, nod your head, take money from your donors, and keep the right people in power, and you'll be rewarded significantly.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense.
Do you want to go ahead and wrap it up?
What
We're at
time are
40
we
minutes.
at?
Yeah,
Yeah,
about
let's
40
wrap it up.
minutes. Wrap it up. All right. You got anything else to say, Fowler?
I think I'm good for now. We'll just have to. We'll update as the Mitch McConnell story keeps going, and obviously we will update across the primary and the general for president.
Yeah. All right, guys, we're what? 7 months, 8 months? We got it. Or no, 7 months. It's gonna be a shit show for 7 months, but we can get through it together. All right, Fowler.
It's off.
What the fuck are you talking about, Fowler?
I said, did you turn it off? Is it still going?
No, you never. We never even. We never even like did an outro. Do you see what I have to deal with, people?
Oh,
Do you see what I have to deal with? I'm staring at Fowler's ass right now because he's got his Discord camera flipped around. He's over here talking about, oh, did you turn it off? Fowler, you do the outro since you're lost in the sauce right now, dude.
we are Fowler and Ardot. We are Legion. We are many.
This is so funny
I
because
didn't want to say this. I didn't want to say this, but I'm also retiring. Mitch McConnell has been in the Senate as long as I've been doing this podcast, and so
Mitch McConnell has been in the Senate
both
as long
stepping
as me and Fowler have been like breathing, like as human beings. Like it's insane. Like I'm not kidding. He's been in the Senate doing the same McConnell shit since we were a lot like children, like born babies, infants in our mother's, arms. He's old as shit, guys. Like fucking old as hell. Um, but yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see y'all in the next video.